and welcome to North Carolina NAACP's emergency town hall meeting, Who Shall Profit, Vendors or Voters? And I want to thank each and every one of you for being here tonight. It seems that since June 25th, 2013, when the Supreme Court returned a decision in Shelby County versus Holder, which essentially struck down Section 4 of the Historic Voting Rights Act of 1965, requiring certain states to gain approval from the federal government before making any changes to electoral law, that there has been a regression or continuing erosion that further eats away at or weakens voting protections and replaces them with voting infections. These infections are working their way through as what we call voter suppression tactics. No sooner than the jurists had rendered their decision, 13 states introduced laws demanding photo voter ID. Right here in North Carolina, legislators went to work on a 14-page bill that had been simmering on a back burner on the legislative hot stove, waiting for an opportunity for the heat to be turned up. Shelby versus Holder was the heat that resulted in the most contentious voter suppression bill that became the 64-page monster bill known as House Bill 589, that did away with out-of-precinct voting, pre-registration of 16 and 17-year-olds, reduction of early voting days, and same-day registration and voting. Those are what I call the overt tactics of voter suppression, the low-end tactics. We're here tonight to talk about some covert or high-end voter suppression tactics. The stakes are too high, the risks too great, and the morale of the people too low to risk further doubt in the minds of the people. The fact of the matter is that our election system is not a healthy one. Since July 28th of this year, advocates across the state have been sounding the alarm, attempting to send a clear message to the State Board of Elections that nothing short of hand-marked paper ballots will restore the public confidence in the election system. All right. There are too many risks, too many malfunctions, and vulnerabilities to contend with electronic voter systems. I believe it was Mark Twain who once said, "In this country we have one great privilege which they don't have in all other countries. When a thing gets to be absolutely unbearable, that people can rise up and throw it off. That's the finest asset we've got, the ballot box. But what happens when they start tampering with the ballot box? That's a good question, and we hope to provide some answers to you tonight. And we have and hope that you would sign on to an online petition, which you will get the link for as we move through this session this evening. And we hope and pray that you will find something meritorious about this event tonight. We are going to now turn to a brief video of Dr. Carol Anderson, who is a Charles Howard Candler Professor and Chair of African American Studies at Emory University. She's the author of several award-winning books, including Eyes Off the Prize, the United Nations and the African American Struggle for Human Rights, 1944 to 1955. The New York Times bestseller White Rage, The Unspoken Truth of Our Racial Divide, and One Person, No Vote, How Voter Suppression is Destroying Our Democracy. Her research has garnered substantial fellowships and grants from the American Council of Learned Societies, the Ford Foundation, National Humanities Center, Harvard University's Charles Warren Center. Currently, she is a Guggenheim Fellow in Constitutional Studies. She earned her PhD in history from The Ohio State University. Please turn your attention to the screen and hear Dr. Carol Anderson.
When we think of voter suppression, we often think of it in terms of the kind of very visible violence that rained down on people in Selma, Alabama, on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. In the 21st century version of it, we think of it in terms of voter ID, voter roll purges, gerrymandering, poll closures, constricting early voting hours. We think of it in those terms, but what has happened? Why do we think of it that way? It's because we've begun to really pay attention to how the very sinews of democracy, to how the very right to vote is being undermined and undercut by these very kind of what I call bureaucratic violence, by bureaucratic violence. And we know that those measures have done damage. And because we have started paying attention to what that kind of voter suppression has done, the people who are implementing it have one or two ways to go. They stop doing it, or they find another method. Unfortunately, they didn't go for door number one. When we're seeing this kind of rush toward these new machines, voting machines, where you cannot verify the ballot, you cannot verify that who you voted for or the initiatives that you voted for were actually what then gets tabulated. That means that they're vulnerable. That means that with just some quick coding, with just a quick flick of the switch, they're easily hackable, that American democracy is in trouble. We must have hand-marked paper ballots. That is the only way to ensure that who you voted for, what you voted for, is actually tabulated, and because it's auditable, you can audit them. You can verify that who you voted for, what you voted for, is actually what ends up on that final tally. Without that, it's another version of voter suppression. Because the people who crafted the voter ID laws, the people who crafted the gerrymandered districts, the people who crafted the closure of polling sites and who constricted early voting hours and early voting days, those are the ones who are pushing through, rushing through to try to get these vulnerable voting machines installed before the 2020 election. Because the media, the public, have been paying attention to now this new version of Jim Crow. So now they're getting ready to go to Jim Crow 3.0. We have to stop it. And one of the ways is by signing a petition that demands that hand-marked paper ballots are the way to go. Thank you.
What I decided to do was to present and just let it be as factual as possible. I'm not making any observations. I'm just letting the articles and headlines kind of speak for themselves. They can be corroborated. This is from verifiedvoting.org, so you can see that this was a documented case where 9 candidates decided that they wanted to contest the election. So in 2012, there was a no confidence vote of the administrator of elections who was counting the elections. And I want to read one of these headlines because I think it's significant. It says, maybe the commercial appeals should keep this week's headline handy so it can be cut and pasted for each election cycle. Shelby County election officials say they correctly voted for. And our administrator was placed on probation because of glitch issues. So we started having all of these glitch issues in 2012 going forward, and there was, long story short, there was a lawsuit every single year. So fast forward to 2014, we had a very prominent judge, Judge Joe Brown, who was running for local prosecutor. And in 2014, there was another sweep. You got Shelby County, a dominant African-American Democrat district, being completely dominated by a white male Republican leadership group. So these candidates, they filed lawsuits, and in 2014, there was another change of power, and a large set of candidates alleged voter irregularities. There's another article that said, you know, if there was in 2010, the Republicans captured every countywide office, and they successfully defended them in 2014. And if it had not been for them moving one election to another calendar year, there would have been another complete sweep. So a local Tri State defender said maybe the Democrats need to reevaluate their political alliances and disband the party. So it really wreaked havoc through Shelby County where people didn't know what to do, they were in disarray. So in 2014, that's when I kind of came around, and a number of these candidates actually came to me, and they were complaining about their election results. And because I've written easily over 200,000 lines of code, I decided to look at our county election system, and I actually got those court case files from Ed Harris and blackboxvoting.org, and I studied that information. And what I decided to do was conduct an experiment, and in 2015, I conducted the experiment. So this is pretty painful. All right, so in 2015, I took a picture of a poll tape, and I captured at the poll tape that it had 548 votes on it. And that's literally the receipt that they post in the window. And when the tabulated results came out, that 548 votes had shrank to 330 votes. That is about as problematic as it can get. It happened 21 more times and no one knew about it. And the lady who was fighting the case, no lawyer would take her case. She had to represent herself pro se. She took this picture that I took on my BlackBerry phone. She presented it to the judge, and the judge basically said somebody had some explaining to do. And at the end of this is October 2015. In December 2015, the administrator decided that it was time to retire. Now, they had been trying to get him to step down and say they had his thumb on the scale. They had been trying to get him to retire for a number of years, and one of the state representatives even called for them not to let him retire, but to fire him and investigate him. So in 2018, the next major election after this guy resigns, and steps down, it goes from sweep Republican, 10 years in a row, to sweep Democrat. And the representation of what those candidates looked like was featured on MSNBC. So it went from male-dominated, white, Republican, to female-dominated, black, Democrat. That was the story. All of these have links, but it was basically me learning that software cannot be trusted. You can play with numbers. You can't play with images, and that's one of the large reasons why John Brakey, I love this guy. He started the Valid Image Project, kind of going after these valid images because that's the one thing that's still protected. And I think everywhere he goes, they reject that because that is equivalent in this day and age to that receipt of that picture that I took in the poll. Thank you guys. I'm sorry for the inconvenience, but thank you so much.
They're thinking they can make it work, but I was saying that I was coming up to say that I'm very apologetic for what is happening right now. But one of my friends always says, the devil is in the details. So I'm going to ask Mr. Dale Rand if he will come forward with a brief introduction of our panelists. Dr. Rand.
Good evening. I have the pleasure of introducing our guest panelists for this evening. First, we will hear from Mr. Hari Kirsty. He is considered one of the world's foremost experts on the topic of electronic security and for voting and critical infrastructure. He is also considered an authority in uncovering critical problems in the electronic voting systems worldwide. As an ethical hacker, Mr. Kirsty is famously known for his successful attempts to demonstrate how the diode election systems voting machines could be hacked. So now, once you and just doing a little research and researching these speakers this evening, you will be amazed at, as I was, how these systems, the electronic systems which we rely so heavily on, can be hacked and manipulated. So Mr. Kirsty was hired by the watchdog group Black Box Voting to test some diode electronic voting machines. He performed 2 voting machine hacking tests, which have become widely known as Kirsty hacks. The first hack was set up on an optical scan voting machine. And the second was set up on a touchscreen voting machine. We are all familiar with those. In response to these successful hacks, California's Secretary of State commissioned a special report by scientists at UC Berkeley to investigate the results and confirm the validity of the testing methodology used in the Kirsty hacks. The UC Berkeley scientists confirmed that the Kirsty attack does work. Mr. Kirsty's attacks on the voting machines were definitely real. He was indeed able to change the election results by doing nothing more than modifying the contents of a memory card. He needed no passwords, no cryptographic keys, and no access to any other part of the voting machine, including the management server that the results were stored on. So, and these tests were filmed and turned into an acclaimed HBO documentary called Hacking Democracy, which was nominated for an Emmy Award for Outstanding Investigative Journalism. Mr. Kirsty is the author of 4 U.S. patent applications for encryption and security, and several additional international patents. So without further ado, I will...
Introduce the other 2. They're all going to be up there.
Okay, good.
And do real close to the mic if you don't mind.
Okay, sure. I'm sorry, everybody. Can you hear me? Our next panelist will be Dr. Duncan Boo. He is professor in the Department of Computer Science and Engineering at the University of South Carolina. Dr. Boo has been placed on the panel of U.S. Commission on Civil Rights regarding voting rights to be held in July of this year. He has been working with the League of Women Voters of South Carolina on voting rights, South Carolina, on the subject of electronic voting machines since 2004. Dr. Buell was one of a group of citizens who conducted an audit of the June 2010 primary and the November 2010 general election results with disturbing conclusions. Our next and final guest panelist would be Dr. Andrew Appel. Dr. Appel is a Eugene Higgins Professor of Computer Science at Princeton University. He served as the chair of the department from 2009 through 2015. His research is in software verification, computer security, programming languages and compilers, and technology. He received a degree in physics from Princeton University in 1981 and a PhD in computer science from Carnegie Mellon University in 1985. Dr. Appel has been editor-in-chief of ACM Transactions on Programming Languages and Systems and is a fellow of the ACM. He has worked on fast in-body algorithms, standard ML New Jersey foundational proof carrying code, and verified systems toolchain. I present to you these guest speakers.
First of all, thank you for having me. I would like to start by saying that when I got involved with the election security hacking voting machine, I was kind of unusual person to get involved because I, first of all, was not interested about it, and I was trapped into this world by a persistent asking me to do that, and that was 2004 when I got involved. And if I would have not seen myself everything what I know right now, I would say that there would be no way of convincing me that everything what I'm talking about would be real. Everything what I have been seeing has been, and experiencing and learning, has been a unbelievable ride in my opinion. How things are way worse than I would have ever accepted as if somebody would have been convincing me. And part of that reason, I was a co-founder and co-organizer of the DEF CON voting machine hacking village. DEF CON voting village is not about learning, not about proving that voting machines can be hacked. Every single machine in the village we had last year and this year has been used in 2016-2018 election, and every single machine has been hacked, and we knew they're going to be hacked. Every single year new people come and they don't know what prior people have been doing. So they find their new vulnerabilities and their new flaws. It's all about etiquette. It's about letting people to find out the truth themselves, letting people to verify what they thought will do, find what is real. And one thing what has been always making me the most happy about the voting village is the participation of local election officials, and law enforcement and authorities, but especially local election officials who come to the village, and very often those who are technology savvy get the first time hack the very voting machines they use to conduct their daily elections. So we have been probably at least 50-folding, if not 100-folding, people who have had a privilege or have had a possibility to first-hand experience how the voting machines work, what are the vulnerabilities, and what are the risks we need to mitigate against, and what is the responsible way of using technology. Because US elections are uniquely complex. There's no way of conducting US elections without help of the computers. But all computers can be hacked. So the question is, now you need the safeguards, you need risk limiting audits and other processes, and you need the votes to be recorded on permanent media, which is paper ballot and preferably hand-marked paper ballot, so that there is a artifact, a permanent mark, what was the voter's intent, And in case of irregularities or doubt of irregularities, you can always go back to that evidence and find yourself a confidence that the election was conducted fair and square. Thank you.
Well, unlike a great many computer science professors, I have actually written code and been paid for it. And I have written code that other people have used. I got into the issue of electronic voting machines in about 2004 with the State League of Women Voters. With the 2010 Democratic primary for U.S. Senate, we had a very anomalous result, and at that point, we started looking at the data. I have analyzed the data from 2010, 2012, 2014, 2016, 2018, and I think I have probably analyzed more Ivotronic data than anybody else in the world. And what I see as one of the basic problems is that we are using too much technology because software is really hard to get right, and software is really hard to make foolproof when it's used by people who only do it every so often instead of every day. We are making the same mistakes in South Carolina in November 2018 that we made in 2010, even after 6 elections of trying to get it right. So I think there's a strong argument from a systems point of view that says we need to make the election process as simple as possible, because there will be mistakes, things will go wrong, and Mr. Murphy was an optimist. Andrew?
My name is Andrew Appel. I want to thank you all for letting me speak to you this evening. And I just want to explain basically what's a voting machine. It's a computer in a box with, a touch screen. You touch the screen, the computer in the box interprets what you do and it decides what results to present at the end of the day. And how does it decide? Well, it's got a computer program that somebody wrote. Somebody installed that in there. And it's completely up to that computer program how to interpret where you touch on the screen. If whoever gets to install that computer program basically decides how the votes are added up. If somebody honest installs a legitimate program in that computer, then it will add up the votes according to what people touched on the screen. If somebody wants to steal an election and they have access to the voting machine to install software in it, then they can install software that shifts 10% of the votes from one column to another. It's really as simple as that. Or 20% if that's what it takes. That was in the old days when you had to actually get physical access to a computer to install new software, but now you can hack computers over the internet. So I expect that the legitimate software installed by the manufacturers really does add up the votes correctly. But think of all the places those voting machines have been in the years since they were sent from the manufacturer. And we know that in the United States, historically, election fraud has more been conducted by insiders than by outsiders or by voters or anything. And it doesn't really even take a conspiracy of insiders to hack an election that way. Just one bad apple can install fake software that's miscounting your votes. So that's the danger if we use paperless touchscreen voting machines to add up our votes. So what should we do? Some people will advocate that we should hand-mark paper ballots and count them by hand. Counting by hand is not such a great thing either to do on a large scale in U.S. elections with lots of things on the ballots. What we should do is hand-mark paper ballots and have them counted by optical scan voting machines. This is done in most of the U.S. It's done in many counties in North Carolina. When you hand-mark a paper ballot, you know what mark you put on that ballot. That ballot can be recounted by hand by humans. The optical scan voting machines that count that ballot could be hacked. They could be lying to you, but the very same paper ballots that you mark as a voter are collected in the sealed ballot box underneath the precinct count optical scan voting machine, and they can be recounted by hand. So therefore, computer-based hacking election fraud can be detected by a recount. It can be corrected by a recount. And if a full recount is too labor-intensive, too expensive, too time-consuming to do on every election, you can do a random sample audit, which means you take a sample, randomly selected of those ballots, and you make sure that sample comes out the same way that the computers claim. That's a very effective way to detect whether the machines may have been hacked, and if the machines may have been hacked, then you can do a full recount of the actual paper ballots that the voters marked, and that recount is done by humans, people in the presence of witnesses from both parties that see what marks are really there on the paper. As a computer scientist, that's the only way I know to be able to trust the results of an election. You can count the votes by computer, but only if they're marked on paper by the voter. Now, there's a new kind of technology that some states are considering to adopt, which is called a ballot marking device. You touch the screen, you select your candidates, the voting machine prints out a sheet of paper that records your choices. That's a kind of paper ballot. You deposit that in a ballot box, it can be recounted later. That would work if only you and all your neighbors would carefully check what's on that paper ballot printed out by the ballot marking device to make sure that it has the same votes that you indicated on the touchscreen. And if you can't trust that you and all your neighbors will do that, then I can hack a voting machine so that what you selected on the touchscreen is not what's marked on that paper ballot. And if what you have marked on the paper ballot is not the selection you made, then any recount in the world is not going to correct the result because the wrong vote will be on the paper ballot. So that's a basic review of the technology. What most states do, and what I recommend North Carolina should do, is hand-mark paper ballots, counted by machine, recountable by hand. What you absolutely should not do is paperless touchscreens that if they're hacked, there's nothing to recount. And what I really don't recommend also is touchscreen machines for marking ballots. Those would only work if it really were true that everybody checked what's printed out on paper, and people just don't do that. So that's sort of my quick introduction to voting machine technology.
Thank you, Mitchell. Of course, you know today, many of you know that in Colorado today, that state has decided that they would move away from barcode balloting. At the same time, North Carolina is adopting it. So this question is to each of you. We can begin in the same order that we went with your introduction. What are your thoughts on Colorado and North Carolina looking in different directions?
I travel around the world in different computer security conferences. And one of the fascinating things about computer-related crime is that it is regional, and some of the crimes never travel or come with a significant delays to different areas of the world. Back in 2006, I was in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and Argentina is one of the countries where voting is mandatory. It's not your right, it's a mandatory duty of a citizen. And back those days, the new upcoming crime, which was already a crime wave, was point-of-sale system hacking with fraudulent and malicious barcodes, reprogramming the barcode reader. So it was not about stealing a single product, it was about reprogramming that barcode reader so that you can do a wholesale and widespread attacks. We have, it made me fascinated about it. We have ever since seen a barcode attacks against different systems spreading around the world. 5 years ago, this kind of attacks started being widespread in Asia. So we know barcodes are dangerous and they have to be sanitized, and also we have to understand how barcode devices work. So until we understand how to defend, and most of the voting machines are general purpose computers which are just cobbled together from off-the-shelf components, which means that there is a lot of vulnerabilities inherent with those. We shouldn't be using barcodes in anything before we understand what is the security posture of that. And that is not only voting ballots, that also is voter registration systems. Because I know that in the history of the United States, nobody has ever falsified driving license for any purpose, like buying beer. But if there would be such criminals having a malicious barcode in the driving license, it is equally something which can cause havoc and disrupt the election. So, but the banning or being very, very careful in the application you want to use barcode is a prudent security practice. Thank you.
I have two thoughts. One is that the barcode devices that I have seen print text for the voter to read, but that's not what is tallied. What is tallied comes from the barcode that the voter cannot verify. So I think there's these kinds of devices suggest to the voter more information than is really there, because the voter cannot verify the ballot. The election officials, if they did a post-election audit, could check that the text matched with the barcode statistically to the point that they would believe that hacking had not happened. But the voter cannot do that, and I think suggesting that printed text the voter reads is in fact important to what gets tallied is misleading to the voter. The other thought I have is that as I read the South Carolina election law, there's a passage in there that says that if any state decertifies an election system that would be used in South Carolina, the vendor of that equipment has to notify the state to the effect that some other state has decertified it. So I'm curious to know whether North Carolina has a similar law that would require them to be notified that somebody else considers what they're considering to be unsafe for use in elections. That would be a good thing. Andrew?
Yeah. I think what Colorado has done is a step forward. Here's the problem with barcode ballots. Remember I talked about the three basic kinds of voting system. There is a hand-marked paper ballot counted by an optical scan machine. There's the touchscreen that prints out a paper ballot that can be counted, and there's a touchscreen with no paper at all. And all of those barcode ballots are in that middle kind. There's a touchscreen that prints out a paper ballot. The problem is, if that touchscreen is hacked and it prints out a lie, it prints out the paper ballot that doesn't have your choices on it, whether that's the human readable part or the barcode, then the recount will count the wrong thing. And there's not much you can do about it. You can check your own printout from that touchscreen machine, and if you detect that the human readable portion doesn't match what you voted, you can raise your hand and get another chance. But all your neighbors who didn't bother to check carefully every single one of the 15 contests on the ballot are susceptible to having their vote stolen. So any of these technologies that uses what a ballot marking device, whether it prints barcodes or not, is a bad idea. All of the technologies that Colorado has just banned are those ballot marking devices. It's a step forward.
Okay, thank you. Harry Hursley, when I came in, I heard you speaking about one of the hackers and what they're doing and how far-reaching and how important it is for the public to know what these hackers are doing. So if you could share a little bit of that story, and same with you, Duncan and Andrew, if you can follow up in that order with the most compelling story of what hackers are actually doing to the American election system. That'll be our last question.
The fascinating thing about U.S. election system is also very unfortunate. And what it really means is that there is no real security considerations in a lot of the data handling. Whether it is handling of the voting machines through their whole life cycle, whether it's a supply chain where the computer and software came from, or how the data has been handled and how the critical programming has been done. If I look, this is not the hacker, but it's as such, but when I looked at Georgia judgment, which came, I believe it was 15th of August, one of the shocking things for me was to read that a critical security posture, critical security element of programming of the Georgia elections, where it was done by 3 individuals who were not even clearly identified whether they were employees of the vendor or subcontractors, independent sectors, but they were doing this all from their homes. That means, from the security point of view, all the claims which have been made about air gapping the systems, secure facilities, all of that, it all went out of the door. All systems, everything we do today is connected to internet. It is either directly connected to internet or indirectly connected to internet. And when you neglect even the most basic security principles and processing practices, you are welcoming disaster. And this is, I think, the biggest single problem I have with any discussion about hackers. There's too much concentration into what happens on the election day, what the voter could be doing in the polling place. And there's not enough understanding that these machines are always directly or indirectly connected to internet. And the attack, the time window for attack is the whole lifetime of the machine. And it's in some cases even before the machine was built. From that time till the day it's going to be discarded and not used. And that is a very generous time window for any attack.
Would concur with what Ari just said. When I talk with election officials, they tell me very sincerely that their systems are not connected to the internet, but it's not always clear to me that they understand that even using removable media like flash drives going back and forth is in fact connecting to the internet. And there are ways that you don't have to do that. If you have to report results, you can report the results on very cheap removable flash drives and then not put those back on the system that's not supposed to be connected to the internet. You hand them out as freebies for somebody. The other issue that comes up, here in South Carolina, we have voted on Ivotronic voting computers for 12 years now. I guess 2004 to 2006 was when they came in. If they were hacked by real professionals, we would never know. So are the results the ones that we expected? I guess they're the results we get because we have no paper trail. We've never had a paper trail. All we have had is what is inside the memory of the Ivotronics, or what gets tallied at the central tabulating computer at county headquarters. And if the people who hacked were really smart, they would cover their tracks and we would just never be able to detect it because there's nothing that would record their having been there. Andrew?
All right, well, let me just start by saying that about 2 years ago, I was on the radio, talking with a radio station in Asheville, and at that time, North Carolina had passed a very good law requiring every county to adopt paper ballots to be counted, by optical scan voting machines, recountable by hand. And I thought, wow, North Carolina's ahead of my state. In New Jersey, we still have those paperless touchscreens, like those other backward states, such as South Carolina. in Louisiana. And so let me tell you about an election that actually happened in New Jersey in about 2011, where the machines got it completely wrong. The machine was misprogrammed, and it gave the winning candidate all the losing candidate's votes, and it gave the losing candidate all the winning candidate's votes. So the outcome came out swapped. And I was appointed by the court to do a forensic examination for the plaintiffs, and the plaintiffs this was a tiny little election. It was just for Democratic county chair in one little county in South Jersey. So the one side, the plaintiffs were able to get affidavits from all of their voters about how they voted. And that was enough, along with my investigation, to convince the court to order a new election. This was a touchscreen, paperless voting machine, and we don't know whether it was hacked or whether it was just a mistake in the configuration, but it got the election completely backwards, to the satisfaction of a Superior Court judge of New Jersey. Now, unfortunately, not every election can you get all the voters from one side to produce affidavits about how they voted, right? Most elections are a lot bigger than that little dinky election in South Jersey. These machines can be hacked, or they can be misconfigured to make mistakes. If in that little election in South Jersey there were paper ballots that you could recount, then everything would have been over in a day. They would have recounted the paper ballots, they would have gotten a true winner, and there wouldn't have been even a court case, really. So, these things do happen. Our protection is the paper ballot.
Great, wonderful. Thank you.
So where do we go from here? This is the call to action, right? And I have 5 steps for you. The first being, we want to sign the petition, okay? It's on the screen. Sign the NAACP hand-marked paper ballots petition. That's step number 1. Everybody say step number 1. Step number 1. Right. Sign hand-marked paper ballots petition. There's the link or text to the number to get the link, right? Is everyone clear with that? Step number 2, we're going to encourage all of your friends, all of your colleagues, all of your family members. Sign the petition. We need hand-marked paper ballots. Step number 3, call. You're going to call your county commissioners. Local county commissioners need to be contacted and tell them that you signed the petition and you don't want barcode voting. Okay? You don't want barcode voting. I saw a statistic that said that these ballots, machine ballots, can cost around $4,000. And we can buy a pen to sign the ballot or to mark the paper ballot for 8 cents. This makes sense, correct? And we know we have some folks who claim to be fiscally responsible on our local boards. So I'll give you one. That's one. When you call them, tell them that you can help them remain fiscally responsible. Okay? Number 3. So we know we want to sign a petition. We're going to pass that link along. We're going to call our county commissioners. Number 4, we're going to go to county commissioner meetings, okay? And request that they not buy barcode ballot machines, okay? We want to go. So we want to sign first. We want to pass the link along. We're going to call. We want to go. And lastly, we're going to encourage. We want to use our influence, okay? Encourage consistent attendance at County Board of Elections meetings, right? If we want to advocate for the paper ballots, hand-marked paper ballots, we're going to have to be there, all right? You've been very kind. Thank you.
Especially as we move forward to 2020, when we pray that our elections will be so secure that they will not be able to be hacked by the Russians or anyone else. But we will bear in mind what Mr. Mueller has said. I would invite all of you to read the Mueller report. Read the Mueller report for yourselves. Don't let anybody tell you what's in the pages of that report, but read it for yourselves. For as Mr. Muller has said, that right now, the Russians and probably others are making efforts to steal our elections, to hack into our systems, and to destroy our democracy. So we have to be the ones that take the responsibility and become accountable for making changes where they need to be made, and to continue to make sure that we go to these meetings. And I'm always telling people that there are 4 meetings that you need to always be consistent in attending. Those are school board meetings, city council meetings, county commissioner meetings, and the board of election meetings. I can tell you without fear of contradiction as a county board member that me and Miss Carolyn Bunker are oftentimes very, very lonely in meetings because no one attends the meetings. And then when we make decisions in the meetings, and they're decisions that they would have rather we not make, then they come at us and they want us to make the decisions that they want us to make. And I always tell them, well, it would help if you were in the room to give me the information that I need, because when I hear from the people in the room, and when I hear from the persons who are in my areas, I'm going to listen to you and govern myself accordingly, because I am a servant and called to be a servant of the people. So I want to hear from you all as it relates to what you hope that the County Board of Elections will be doing. And certainly, I'm grateful tonight for Dr. Stella Anderson's presence, and for Jeff Carmen, also her colleague, who has sent greetings to us this evening. We have watched them in action and know that they are on the side of those of us who are advocating for hand-marked paper ballots. And we will certainly do all that we can to support them as they place themselves in some precarious situations oftentimes. We will make sure that their other colleagues hear from us loudly and clearly what demands we have of them. And so we thank you again, and we want to open it up after we close with prayer. We want to open it up to those of you who may have questions, to hang around and allow ourselves to gather together and to respond to your questions. Thanks again for being here tonight.